Hello and welcome to another video from Sportive Cyclist, the Mammal channel. I'm Monty. Now in this video I'm going to talk about the three main climbs of RideLondon. How steep they are, how long they are, and most importantly, how hard they are to ride. Now a lot of people get pretty worried about the climbing involved in the event, particularly first-time participants. The aim of this video is to allay those concerns. I think the headline message is that you shouldn't really be worrying about the climbing. If you are going to spend your time worrying about the event, I think there are a few other things that you should be concerned about. So if you stick around till the end of this video, I'll let you know what I think those are. Now, to put my ability on the bike and my fitness in context, I've done RideLondon twice. I did it the first time in the inaugural running of the event in 2013 and most recently in 2018. Both have been my longest bike rides by some considerable distance. All of this advice, information is given from the standing of someone that is not knocking out 100-mile hard rides on a regular basis. So moving on to the hills themselves. The first climb is Newlands Corner. To be honest, I think it only has reached the status of a climb through its inclusion in the RideLondon event itself. It's 1.75 kilometers long, 82 meters of ascent. Strava gives it average gradient of 5%, suggesting the maximum gradient's around 10 or 11%, which sort of feels about right, but that only really occurs in the first part of the middle section of the climb. Strava rates it as a category 4 climb, and if you're interested in what those categories are, I've written a post on the blog which I'll link to below. It's a straight road, no bends, a pretty uninspiring climb. I guess the best bit about it is from a RideLondon perspective, the feed station is right at the top of the climb. Now the first time I rode RideLondon, I did stop at that feed station and it's quite tightly packed with quite a few people there. It was quite a hassle to circulate around and get the food and get back on the road. Last year I just rode over the top and down the other side. To put the climb in context in terms of how much time it takes, it took me about 7 minutes. Looking at the leaderboard again on Strava, that puts me at around about 31,000th out of about 62,000 odd people doing it, so approximately halfway, so that gives you some context as to how long it might take you. Now the second climb is Leith Hill, which is I think most people's focus when they do RideLondon. This is a 2-kilometre climb, 135 metres of ascent. Strava gives it an average gradient of 7%. Probably agree with Strava that the maximum gradient is somewhere in the mid-teens. Again, it's a category 4 climb in the overall scheme of things compared to some of the continental climbs, not too difficult. My time was around about 10 minutes, virtually in the middle of anyone that's attempted it. Now probably on a standalone basis, I'd say that Leith Hill is the hardest of the three climbs. It certainly has the steepest sections. You'll need to get out of the saddle at times to get up the slope. Specifically for RideLondon itself, it's made harder by the fact that it's something of a squeeze point, so you will be riding it with a vast number of other riders at the same time, so you'll have to contend with them, and people do sometimes have the habit of coming to a grinding stop in front of you. That all said, it's 10 minutes of effort, and once you're done you've got a nice long descent on which to recover. So climb 3 is Box Hill, which is arguably the Southeast's favourite cycling climb. Now there are a few different variants on Strava. The one I've gone with is the longest one, which starts at the roundabout right at the bottom and goes all the way up past the National Trust Cafe, past the viewing point, and then on to the highest point of the climb. Now that does involve a little bit of descending between the viewing point and the top, which brings the overall average gradient down. So for this climb, which Strava actually categorises as a 3, it's 4.3 kilometres in length, 171 metres of elevation with a 4% average gradient. Now that took me about 20 minutes to ride, which again puts me somewhat in the middle of the pack and gives you, if you're an average rider, a sort of sense as to how long it will take. In terms of gradient, if we just go with the switchback sections of the climb, then it's more like an average of 5%. Now, talking of switchbacks, it's the two hairpins that make this Surrey Alpe d'Huez something of a favourite with cyclists in the area. As well as being a nice steady gradient, in 2012 the road was resurfaced ahead of the Olympics, and therefore there's a nice smooth surface on which to ride. In terms of maximum gradient, I think it perhaps gets to about 10%, but only just, and only occasionally during the course of the climb. Now, when I started this blog back in 2013, one of my first posts was about the RideLondon course, and I made a bit of a tit of myself, describing the Box Hill climb in particular as the hardest of the three, and pointing to the fact that there were 20% plus gradients on the climb. Now, this was potentially a glitch in the elevation data. I think it's fairly safe to say that even at the apexes of the hairpins, the gradient gets nowhere near that point. So whilst Box Hill might be the smoothest and the steadiest in terms of gradient, in fact in 2018 I found it the hardest of the three climbs to ride, because at that point I was cramping quite severely, I think having not eaten enough earlier on in the ride. And I think with it being the third of the three climbs, a lot of cyclists probably do find it the hardest, even though on paper you would probably say that Leith Hill was. The other thing to bear in mind about Box Hill is that whilst admittedly it comes towards the back end of the event, there is still 25 miles of riding to do once you've descended down the other side, and it's something of a schlep back through southwest London. And I found that, I think on both participations in RideLondon, the hardest part of the event, certainly the bit before you hit Kingston upon Thames and the crowd started and you started to realise you weren't too far away from home. But that section after Box Hill is quite hard, so I don't think I would recommend you absolutely emptying yourself on Box Hill itself. I think it's worth leaving a little bit in the tank for the miles that follow. So that's the three main climbs of RideLondon dealt with. Now, at the beginning of this video I talked about the thing that you should worry about rather than the climbs. Now, if you add up the times that I took to ride each of those climbs on each event, so that's 7 minutes followed by I think 10 minutes on Leith Hill and say 20 minutes on RideLondon, we're talking about 37 minutes of climbing. Out of an event time I think I took around about 6 hours 20-ish in both cases. So you can see there's a considerable amount of time that's not spent climbing. And I think that's my point about not worrying too much about the climbing in RideLondon and instead focusing on other things. Making sure that my training takes into account the need to maintain a good pace whilst on the flat and whilst on the bike for 5 or 6 hours. I'd also be focusing more on my fueling and hydration, so making sure that I'm eating enough on a regular basis and drinking enough. As I mentioned earlier on, that I cramped on Box Hill, and I'm pretty sure that was because I wasn't eating enough and drinking enough earlier on in the event. RideLondon is an unusual event in being closed roads, and certainly closed roads through London, so it is very easy to get quite excited, certainly in the first part of the ride, whilst you are in large groups of people hurtling through central London. You perhaps push yourself and your legs at a pace that you've not necessarily trained at. I think those sorts of things can contribute to making the second half of the event slightly harder than it needs to be. So my top tip and the thing to focus on would be riding at a pace that you can sustain through the course of the event, and worry slightly less about the climbing. That all said, there is something about the climbs that I would focus upon, and that's the other sides of them, or rather the descents. In 2018, when it was a very wet running, it absolutely tipped it down on the day. Both the descent from Newlands Corner and from Leith Hill were very fast and very wet and very slippy. You felt very exposed. It's under tree cover, so you do tend to get leaves on the road as well. There are some people that will ride down that some sort of suicidal pace. Both times there have been crashes that have taken place on Leith Hill, some quite serious ones. Keep to the left-hand side of the road. Don't be afraid to use your brake and go at the pace that you want to go at. Focus on staying safe. Going up the climbs won't determine the success or otherwise of your day. Certainly going down could be the end of the ride if you make a mistake. So over the last 6 years I've written loads about RideLondon on this blog, and I'll link to a selection of posts underneath this video. If you're doing RideLondon this year or you're just interested, feel free to check some of those out. If you have any questions about the RideLondon event, or if you have any particular concerns, leave a comment below this video and I'll do my best to answer them. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, hit subscribe. I've been Monty and this is Sportive Cyclist, the Mammal channel. I promised at the start of this video to give you something to worry about.